The air conditioner? No. But if you want to turn the fans off, you can just turn the dials to turn the... Yeah, hopefully that'll turn off once it cools off to whatever the set temperature is, 70 something, 3 or whatever the case is. And it should happen sooner than later just because the body heat is lessened. We'll try without. If it doesn't work, inshallah, we'll call it. Otherwise, we'll then we'll use the sound system. So, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillahi Muhammad ibn Abdillahi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een amma ba'd. So tonight, inshallah, we're going to finish up what we started off a few weeks back, and I apologize for the break, but the past 2 Sundays there was weddings and celebrations, and so I had to be there. I couldn't excuse myself. So this topic, the first topic in this section, this new section dealing with water, just to refresh the memory of some, is with regards to اختلافهم على الماء المتنجس, the differences of opinion that the ulama rahmatullahi alayhim have with regards to the water that has become impure because it's come into contact with an element that is in and of itself impure. In impure, we don't mean dirt or dust, we mean impure in the sense of it being something of urine and the likes. So after having discussed the different positions, having gone through the evidences for the different positions, we conclude with this third and last section where the Shaykh rahmatullahi alayh, Shaykh Muhammad ibn Ahmad ibn Muhammad ibn Ahmad ibn Rushd al-Hafid rahmatullahi alayh, where he says, وَأَوْلَى الْمَذَاهِبِ عِنْدِي وَأَحْسَنُهَا طَرِيقَةً فِي الْجَمْعِ هو أن يحمل حديث أبي هريرة وما في معناه على الكراهية. So he says, with regards to his conclusion now, he analyzed and he expressed the different positions, their evidences. He's giving his personal position, saying that from what he thinks is the best of the madahib, of the different positions of the scholars with regards to what should be done, is to actually combine the different evidences. Instead of it using some against the other, to try to combine utilizing all of them, al-jama'. And this, if we could understand, is actually from among the logical progressive steps that the ulama use with regards to al-adillah. The first thing they try to do is al-jama'. They try to utilize all of them. Why? Because if and when it's possible, we want to incorporate everything of what there is of Quran and or Sunnah and not have to pick some over the other. The only time that they will resort to a tarjih of having to decide which they're going to accept and which they're not is if and when it's not possible to combine between the evidences and to utilize all of them. Well, in this case, Shaykh ibn Rushd rahmatullahi alayh, he sees that it is possible to combine between all of these different adillah of evidences, so that there would be no need to have to favor some over the other or to use some and to negate the others. How is that? He explains, he says, by taking the hadith of Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala anhu and what was similar to it, by understanding it from the perspective that this is something that is disliked, not that it is something that is in and of itself haram, or that it is something that actually causes the water to become impure. Now remind us, the hadith of Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala anhu was the hadith where he narrates to us when Rasulullah alayhi salatu wasalam said, whenever you wake up from sleep, don't stick your hand into the pot of water, but wash your hands first, and then you can go ahead and dip your hand into the water. And from the ulama who looked at that and said that that's clear that even a small quantity of najasa, of an impurity, can cause water to become impure, the Shaykh is telling us that that's not the best understanding, because we want to utilize all of these evidences. He says that hadith, it's basically telling us that it is disliked, not that it's in any way disliked because the purity of the water is affected, or that it is in any way becomes impure, therefore it's no longer permissible to purify oneself, to cleanse oneself for worship. Well, what about the others? He says, وَحَدِيثُ أَبِي سَعِيدٍ وَأَنَسٍ رَضِيَ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى عَنْهُمَا عَلَى الْجَوَازِ. And the hadith of Anas, of Abu Sa'id, as well as the hadith of Anas. And if you remember, the hadith of Abu Sa'id was the hadith with regards to the well that was used for water, for drinking of water, while at the same time it was used as a dumping ground. So there's that water, bi'ru al-buda'a, that they would get water to drink from it, but they would also throw all sorts of different things in it, of animal body parts that they would not use, the women with regards to blood from the different things of their body in that sense. In the hadith of Anas radiallahu anhu, if I'm not mistaken, that was the hadith of I was thinking that it was the hadith of urinating in standing water, but no, hold on. No, the hadith of Anas was the one with the Bedouin urinating in the masjid, right? Where the Prophet ﷺ had said, let him be, and then take that bucket of water and pour it over the spot that it was done. He's saying that these two hadiths are telling us that it is permissible. That it is permissible in the sense that the water of what is used, it's telling us that the water is going to remain pure, and it is going to purify whatever there is of the impurity. So in doing this, we have the understanding of what was mentioned that seemed as though it indicated that water would become impure, that it's not necessarily the case, and of that which is taken from the other ahadith that makes it clear that the water does not become impure, and it is permissible to use the water in these cases, despite what there's going to be of contact with impurities. And in doing so, according to Shaykh Ibn Rushd rahmatullahi alayh, he looks at this and says that we have successfully included all of these different evidences without having to throw some away and accept only others. And then he goes on to say, لأن هذا التأويل يبقي مفهوم الأحاديث على ظاهرها. He says because this interpretation that he's given, it allows for all of these ahadith to be accepted as they are and for their meanings to be understood at the literal level of what is being mentioned in them. And he goes on to explain what he means. حديث أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه من أن المقصود بها تأثير النجاسة في الماء. He says, with regards to the two hadiths of Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala anhu, the hadith of not putting your hand in the bucket of water, as well as urinating in a still body of water, he says what's understood from that is that the impurity affects the water. He says, وَحَدُّ الْكَرَاهِيَةِ عِنْدِي هُوَ مَا تَعَافُهُ النَّفْسُ وَتَرَى أَنَّهُ مَاءٌ خَبِيثٌ. He says, and with regards to how he's interpreting that it is showing that it is something disliked, not that it is something that impurifies the water, but that it's disliked. And he's saying that this is disliked, and he's giving a definition for what is, according to him, makruh in that sense, something that is disliked. And he says it is what the person regards as being disgusting, something that they are averted from, something that they turn away from, something that they're not going to be inclined towards. And this is where sometimes you'll find that there can be a difference of what one person may consider disgusting and another person doesn't. Right? Because sometimes even in the aspect of people's cultural background, things can be okay to some and gross to others. And this is why we find a lot of the times this aspect of urf, where we have a lot of difference of opinion, because we're basing it off of people's customs or their traditions, or in that sense of what is customary. And there's a huge range that can happen in that. So he's saying, according to himself, that it's something that the person themselves is disgusted with. And he goes, وَحَدُّ الْكَرَاهِيَةِ نعم. He says, وَذَلِكَ أَنَّمَا يَعَافُ الْإِنسَانُ شُرْبَهُ يَجِبُ أَن يَجْتَنِبَ اسْتِعْمَالَهُ فِي الْقُرْبَةِ إِلَى اللَّهِ تَعَالَى. He goes, so for example, if a person finds disgusting drinking a particular thing, he goes, they should also then find it disgusting to use that in an act of worship that's supposed to bring them close to Allah. Right? So if that water is something that, for example, like, just in our sake, if a fly were to fall into that bucket of water and we get grossed out and we throw away our drink, we throw away our meal, then naturally a person who's going to be that way with regards to their water, they're going to think just the same when it comes to using that water, for example, to make wudu. Now naturally we don't consider the fly to be najis, even though the fly will go on poop and it'll go on feces and things of that sort, but the fly in and of itself is not disgusting. The point is what we find to be disgusting. So he's basically telling us that if you're considering something that is not a religious matter to be something that you're grossed out by it, then it should also hold true that you're going to be grossed out and not use it for something that's an act of worship. Right? And he goes, وَأَنْ يَعَافَ وُرُودَهُ عَلَى ظَاهِرِ بَدَنِهِ كَمَا يَعَافُ وُرُودَهُ عَلَى دَاخِلِهِ. And he continues to give a further rationalization, is saying that he would also be grossed out by using that water on the outside of their body in the same way that would be grossed out by consuming it and taking it inside of their body. Okay. He says, وَأَمَّا مَنْ احْتَجَّ بِأَنَّهُ لَوْ كَانَ قَلِيلُ النَّجَاسَةِ يُنَجِّسُ قَلِيلَ الْمَاءِ لَمَا كَانَ الْمَاءُ يُطَهِّرُ أَحَدًا أَبَدًا. He then goes to the position of those of the scholars who made the statement saying that a small quantity of an impurity, that it will cause a small quantity of water to become impure. And again, he's addressing the issue for those who said that the hadith of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, that it's referring to a tahrim, that it's impure, that it's haram to use it because it's now najis because of whatever impurity has entered into it and has mixed with it. He's addressing them. He's saying, as far as those who are using those evidences to say that a small quantity of an impurity is going to cause a small quantity of water to become impure, he says then it would be that there would never be anything of water that would ever really be clean and pure to be used for that sake. And he goes on to explain, إِذْ كَانَ يَجِبُ عَلَى هَذَا أَن يَكُونَ الْمُنْفَصِلِ مِنَ الْمَاءِ عَنِ الشَّيْءِ النَّجِسِ الْمَقْصُودِ تَطْهِيرُهُ أَبَدًا نَجِسًا. Saying, because if you really think about it, whatever that impurity is that the water is being used for to clean it and to remove it, according to that logic and rationale, that object, that thing, it always remains an impurity, that it never changes, it never becomes purified in and of itself. And not only that, but now whatever comes into contact with it, it also becomes impure. So it's like this chain reaction, like the cooties, you ever play that game as a kid? So if I touch you and he got the cooties and now you touch him, now three of us have the cooties. It's almost in the sense of saying that water has the cooties because it came into contact with an impurity, and no matter what, anything now of whatever else is going to come into contact with it, the water or that substance itself, it's only going to further increase the impurity of all of these things. فَقَوْلٌ لَا مَعْنَ لَهُ. So he's saying this is a statement that, it's incomprehensible. If you really play it out like that, he's saying you realize that there's you can't go thinking like that, because there would be no way for us to function, because everything would then be considered in that sense najis, and we'd have a problem. He says, لما بيناه, he says, فقول لا معنى له لما بيناه من أن نسبة آخر جزء يرد إلى الماء على آخر جزء يبقى من النجاسة في المحل نسبة الماء الكثير إلى النجاسة القليلة. So he says that statement, it's incomprehensible because of what he has already expressed and explained from earlier. And he's specifically saying, because if we look at it, the portions of water that are being introduced to the impurity to clean it, that spot, that location, that thing, he says it's the same thing like the quantity of large water to a small quantity of impurity. How's that? He says, وَإِن كَانَ where was I? Hold on, I lost my spot. نعم. وَإِن كَانَ يَعْجَبُ بِهِ كَثِيرًا مِنَ الْمُتَأَخِّرِينَ. He said, even though some of the scholars in his time, they prefer this position, this statement, he says, فَإِنَّا نَعْلَمُ قَطْعًا أَنَّ الْمَاءَ الْكَثِيرَ يُحِيلُ النَّجَاسَةَ وَيَقْلِبُ عَيْنَهَا إِلَى الطَّهَارَةِ. He says, because we're certain that with regards to a lot of water, when it comes into contact with the impurity, it changes the impurity and it changes it to the point of actually making it something pure. أحال يحيل. And this is an important concept in fiqh, that a pure substance, when it comes into contact with an impure one, that it actually changes the impure one to something else, and it also changes it to become something pure. Examples of that with regards to many things of what we have. And just one example is this issue of cheese, because it always keeps getting brought up. Is cheese halal? Because the rennet, the enzyme that they get, the enzyme, it comes from the guts of animals. And we don't know whether those animals were halal. We don't know whether they were slaughtered correctly. We don't know whether they were from pork or otherwise. So when you look at what these halal haram books are going to tell you, because there's some food scientist or some chemist who wrote it, they're just looking at the ingredient and right away they're checking it off saying, oh, haram. And all of these different derivatives of products that are the byproducts and the byproducts of byproducts, they declare all of these different things haram. Why? Because there's no fiqh there to understand that there's an Islamic principle of al-istihala, in this case, of it changing. In that which is pure, if it is larger in quantity, it affects that which is impure, and it overwhelms it such that it's almost as though now you don't have anything left of the impurity, because it's like a drop in the ocean. That drop, in comparison to the ocean, it's nothing. And so when you look at the enzyme, for example, and you see that it's less than 1%, and it's actually less than 0.1%, what in the world is that by comparison to everything else? It's nothing. But not only that, if you were to look at the process by which some of this stuff, in the way that it's mixed and who knows what, etc., we're looking at what this fiqh issue is telling us of what the Shaykh rahmatullahi alayhi is saying, قَطْعًا نَعْلَمُ قَطْعًا. That he's saying we know this with certainty, that it changes it and it even transforms it into that which is now pure. And that's powerful. Where were we? He says, وَلِذَلِكَ أَجْمَعَ الْعُلَمَاءُ عَلَى أَنَّ الْمَاءَ الْكَثِيرَ لَا تُفْسِدُهُ النَّجَاسَةُ الْقَلِيلَ. He says, and this is why there's already ijma' among the scholars, that a small quantity of an impurity, it does not affect, it does not cause a large quantity of water to become impure. فإذا تابع الغاسل صب الماء على المكان النجس أو العضو النجس فيحيل الماء ضرورة عين النجاسة بكثرة. He says, and so if we were to take a look at, for example, a person who is pouring water onto the spot that has this impurity, or on their body, for example, which has the impurity, he says, then we know with certainty that the water, it changes the source of whatever that impurity was because of the large quantity of water. So somebody may say, well, what's a large quantity of water? Well, take a look at this. You go to use the bathroom, you've done number 2. How much water does it really take for you to purify your body from the najasa of number 1, or in this case, number 2? A cup? 8 ounces? 12 ounces? For some people, 10 gallons is not enough. Forget half a gallon. You don't really need all that much, right? So in that case, what is he saying? He's saying that what the water has done, it has dissolved, it has removed, it has purified whatever that source was. Right? What else? He says, وَلَا فَرْقَ بَيْنَ الْمَاءِ الْكَثِيرِ أَنْ يَرِدَ عَلَى النَّجَاسَةِ الْوَاحِدَةِ بِعَيْنِهَا دَفْعَةً أو يَرِدَ عَلَيْهَا جُزْءًا بَعْدَ جُزْءٍ. He says, and there's no difference in this case of how the impurity is addressed. Whether the pure water is poured on it all at once, or that it's bit by bit, little by little, in succession. He said there's no difference. Because what we're looking at here is that the water is what's still coming into contact, regardless if you pour the whole thing at once or you go ahead and have it little by little. He says, فَإِذًا هَؤُلَاءِ إِنَّمَا احْتَجُّوا بِمَوْضِعِ الْإِجْمَاعِ عَلَى مَوْضِعِ الْخِلَافِ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَمْ يَشْعُرُوا بِذَلِكَ وَالْمَوْضُعَانِ فِي غَايَةِ التَّبَايُنِ. He says, and so those ulama who are looking at this and differentiating and saying that, a small amount of impurity is going to affect even a small amount of water, and by trying to use the issue of what's ijma', of what is already agreed upon, as evidence, he's saying that there's a big difference between these two, that you can't bring them in together. Then he concludes with a sentence saying, فَهَذَا مَا ظَهَرَ لَنَا فِي هَذِهِ الْمَسْأَلَةِ مِنْ سَبَبِ اخْتِلَافِ النَّاسِ فِيهَا وَتَرْجِيحِ أَقْوَالِهِمْ فِيهَا. He goes, so this is what he's come to of an understanding and a conclusion with regards to this topic, and the differences of the scholars with regards to this particular topic and the evidence that they used and what they preferred of evidence over others and so on. He says, وَلَوْ وَدِدْنَا لو أن سلكنا في كل مسألة هذا المسلك. He says, and I would wish that I could do this, I would love to do this with every single topic of what he's covering. لكن رأينا أن هذا يقتضي طولا وربما عاق الزمان عنه. He says, but what we've realized is that this will take up a whole lot more time, and we probably don't have the time to give every single topic this level of in-depth analysis. وأن الأحوط هو أن الغرض الأول الذي قصدناه. He says, and what we think to be safer is to go back to what the initial intention was. فإن يسر الله تعالى فيه وكان لنا انفساح من العمر فسيتم هذا الغرض إن شاء الله. He says, so if Allah Azza wa Jal makes it easy for us and we have extra time, then perhaps we'll be able to look to complete a more thorough approach and analysis with regards to this book of what he has of comparative fiqh. And with that we conclude. And if there are any questions, inshallah Azza wa Jal, we'll go ahead and do our best to address them, inshallah. Or comments. Going once.
Was this part like the water? I didn't get what is the water? Like taking a water or drink?
So this was the third of a three-part series, and what we began with was the understanding that the scholars, in the way that they're interpreting pure water, when it comes into contact with an impurity, how that affects the impurity, how that affects the water. Does the water, if the water comes into contact with the impurity,